All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're completely deconstructing the strict conditional logic behind the head of household tax filing status. We're going to look at this through the lens of highly detailed data to uncover the implicit assumptions, actionable insights, and rigid rules that govern who actually qualifies for these highly scrutinized benefits. We're moving way beyond the surface-level guidelines to truly understand the core mechanisms and the exact cause and effect relationships at play here.
Here is the roadmap for our analysis. We'll start with the core eligibility framework. Look at the marital status exceptions, define the financial contribution thresholds, explore the residency rules, the evidentiary requirements, and finally wrap up with the compliance burden. Okay, part 1. The core eligibility framework. Let's establish the baseline.
So why does any of this actually matter? Well, expert analysis shows that the head of household status gives you massive structural economic advantages. We're talking lower marginal tax rates and a significantly higher standard deduction compared to just filing as a single individual. It's a huge financial payout, and because the math is undeniably so much better for the taxpayer, the system inherently assumes a higher risk of people getting it wrong or even misclassifying on purpose. That economic reality is exactly why these qualifying mechanisms are so heavily regulated and audited.
Which brings us to the 3 foundational pillars for eligibility. First, marital status. Second, a strict financial threshold. And third, a residency requirement. Honestly, think of this like an AND logic gate in a computer program. You literally have to satisfy all 3 conditions at the exact same time. If you hit the financial and residency rules, but say you fail the marital status rule, boom, the whole claim collapses. There's absolutely no partial credit here. Let's break down the hidden, non-obvious complexities residing inside each of these 3 distinct pillars. Moving on to section 2, marital status exceptions. Let's look at the implicit assumptions. There is a wild contrast here between the obvious baseline rule and a really specific, non-obvious exception. A core insight from the data is that an individual who is technically legally married can actually be categorized as completely unmarried for the specific purposes of this tax framework. Pretty crazy, right? This beneficial status shift triggers if the spouse is a non-resident alien, or, and this is much more common, through a very precise, strictly documented timeline of physical separation. So we absolutely have to define what lived apart actually means. A lot of people implicitly assume that just because they're the sole financial earner, they automatically qualify as head of household, even if they're separated but maybe still sharing a space. Yeah, that is a completely false assumption. The regulatory frameworks mandate absolute physical separation for the final 6 months of the year. If a separated spouse spends even a couple of nights sleeping on the couch in December, that continuous timeline is instantly broken, the exception fails entirely, and the filing status snaps right back to married. All right, section 3, financial contribution thresholds. Let's talk about quantifying those costs. The framework strictly requires that you must cover more than 50% of the household costs. Pay close attention to that greater than symbol. Exactly 50%? That's a fail. It has to be 50.1% or higher. This is a rigid quantitative test, not a rough approximation or a generous ballpark estimate. It requires verifiable math to prove that the threshold has been definitively crossed.
Let's ditch the generic statements and really break these costs down analytically. The actionable insights tell us that qualifying expenses are entirely structural. We're talking rent, property taxes, utilities, and the food consumed inside the home. Essentially, they are the fixed and variable costs required to keep the physical building operational. On the flip side, non-qualifying expenses like clothing, educational costs, medical bills, or vacations, those are strictly personal. They belong to the individual, not the infrastructure of the house itself. If you include personal expenses in your math, you corrupt the formula and completely invalidate your 50% calculation.
Let's jump over to section 4, qualifying person residency rules. The person anchoring this claim can't just be some random friend you happen to support financially.
The qualifying individual has to fit into a highly specific relational and residency matrix. You have to filter through complex relationship tests, age limits, and overlapping support criteria. It is a multi-layered filter designed to ensure only strictly defined dependents can actually trigger your eligibility.
Now, here is one of the absolute most critical, non-obvious details in the entire framework. Look at this stark divergence between two types of dependents. A qualifying child must share your physical residency, but a dependent parent? The system actually has a massive structural carve-out for them. A qualifying parent can live entirely on their own, like in their own home or an assisted care facility, as long as the filer meets that strict financial threshold of paying more than 50% of their separate living costs.
We also have to account for what's called a temporary absence. The logic here elegantly accommodates specific edge cases, like, say, a 22-year-old student living away at a university for 8 months out of the year. Legally speaking, the framework treats that student as if they're still sitting in their bedroom at the primary residence, safely preserving that continuous residency requirement. So, the physical absence is overwritten by the legal definition of a temporary, educational, or even medical displacement.
Moving right along to Section 5, Evidentiary and Documentation Requirements. Here is the exact cause and effect flow of the due diligence process. Passively accepting a claim, that is mathematically invalid. The preparer or auditor has to proactively identify gaps, ask highly specific probing questions, and meticulously document the answers. You aren't just filling out a form here. You are actively building an evidentiary case file to prove that every single variable in the framework has been rigorously tested and independently verified. The foundational guidelines actually stipulate that the burden of proof rests entirely on active, documented inquiry. It's not enough to simply assume a child lives with a parent. You literally have to ask, where exactly did this dependent sleep for the last 183 days of the year? Without carefully documented answers backing up the physical residency, the entire claim is structurally unsound. Finally, let's hit Section 6, the compliance burden and systemic oversight. Look, this system is fundamentally built to detect anomalies. Any break in the logical flow, any inconsistency at all in the provided data, it automatically escalates the compliance burden. If a specific data point conflicts with standard operational reality or just basic mathematical probability, it instantly gets flagged for a deep review and enhanced due diligence. Analytical data highlights very specific edge cases that act as massive high-risk triggers. For example, claiming a non-immediate relative, like a niece. Why does that set off alarm bells? Because the baseline assumption is that a child lives with their actual biological parents. So to claim a niece, you have to prove a negative. You have to prove that the biological parents are completely absent and unable to claim the child before you can even begin to test the primary variables. Scenarios exactly like that demand rigorous, highly documented proof to satisfy the regulators. So as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the macro picture and ask a tough question. How does this incredibly strict evidentiary burden impact overall compliance? By applying these rigid, heavily structured definitions of household and residency to highly fluid modern family dynamics, does this framework actually efficiently protect the system from fraud? Or does it just overwhelmingly complicate the lives of people who are honestly trying to navigate it? That right there is the ultimate tension at the heart of this entire compliance engine. Thanks so much for joining me for this analysis, and keep questioning the data.